Today we're going to talk about out of the darkness. Interesting topic, huh? Everyone has a demon. Everybody has to face a demon in their life. Now, that demon could be trauma, could be abuse, could be addiction, could be depression. It just simply could be a lack of self-esteem. Whatever that demon is, so many of us try to fight it alone. And that's exactly what the demon wants. Because if it can separate you from the herd, it wins. Now remember this. I don't care what your demon is. It is never too late to face it and to change your life. And we're going to get into that right now. My guest today is Debra Holz. Now, Debra has seen and has faced unimaginable demons in her life, and trauma and addiction and abuse. And she battled depression for nearly 50 years. 50 years that she came out of the darkness. Let me tell you a little bit about Debra. Debra's an accomplished writer. She's a certified life coach. She has a bachelor's degree from United States International University. She's attended graduate school at Boston University. And her book, Out of the Darkness, Aligning Science and Spirit to Overcome Depression, was released yesterday on a pre-order special, December 8th, for 99 cents. And you can still, today, December 9th, get that pre-order special ebook for 99 cents. So right now, click on the link, order this book. This is something you need to read. I had the luxury or the pleasure of seeing in the manuscript, and this is something everybody has to have. Everybody needs this book. So Debra, welcome to Life Altering Events.
Thanks, Frank.
Debra, this book it doesn't just touch people's emotions. It's going to grab them and shake them to the core. Tell us a little bit briefly about your early life, your childhood.
Because I believe and have learned that depression is largely related to how your brain is wired, I realized many years later that my brain began wiring itself for depression when I was about 4 years old, my earliest memory, perhaps before that. But what occurred was my poor mother had us, my brother and I, in our teens, and she was a troubled, suffering woman herself, and she abandoned my brother and me to private foster care when I was 4. And of course, I didn't understand what was going on. But what was particularly traumatic and exacerbated what was already developing in my brain is my mother had told my brother and me, my brother is a year younger than I am, that she was taking us to Disneyland that day. And what resulted was we were excited. We thought we were going to go see Mickey Mouse and Donald Duck. And instead, she dropped us off at a foster home. And the trauma of that, the betrayal, the sense of abandonment and aloneness started naturally wiring my brain in a way that wasn't healthy. The foster mother, who I recall, was very cold and very cruel. And she kept reminding us that we were unwanted and that we were annoying. And during the 2 years I was there, I never remember being smiled at or held. And I only remember seeing my mother once during that time. In retrospect, like I just said, I didn't have words for how I was feeling, but I believe it was depression. It was the beginning of depression.
Absolutely. I can't even imagine. Your child has no point of reference for this. It's just terrible.
And as I'll talk about later, the shock of it reverberated in my body. It wasn't just my emotions, but as I came to learn, depression doesn't just affect you mentally and emotionally, it affects you physically, and it can be debilitating, which it eventually was for me.
It absolutely can. Now, your story continued. As I was reading your book, you said at 16, you were told, get out, go fend, see if you can survive on your own.
Yeah, I don't mean to laugh because it sounds terrible, but all these years since, it's like ancient history to me. It's preposterous that a parent would tell their child to get out. And it's funny, when I was preparing for this, I was thinking about how I was at that age. My mother and father retrieved us from the foster home when I was about 6, and thus resumed several tumultuous years with my father, who's very angry, abusive, rageful, verbally, emotionally, physically abusive. And yet, when he left the home when I was 11, my mother found a new man when I was 13. And I was already a very angry child. It wasn't just sad and depressed. I was very, very angry. And in a sense, that anger protected me. And so when I was a teenager, I started fighting back, with words. So this new stepfather, he comes in, and now he's going to tell me how to behave and what to do and make all these rules. And at the same time, he was a Los Angeles drug dealer. And I was aware of this, and he was doing other bad things too. And I was like, I had no respect for the man. So he expected me to follow his rules. And I was rebellious, and I challenged him and I questioned him. And he didn't like that at all. And eventually he got tired. He used to say things like I was too smart for my own good and I should learn to keep my mouth shut. Well, my personality isn't such that I easily keep my mouth shut. So that just aggravated him. And eventually, when I was 15, my mother said I had to leave. And for a very short period of time, I lived with my father for the first time since my parents divorced. And he had enough of me within a very short period of time. So he sent me back to her. And at 16, they told me to get out. At that point, I wasn't being allowed to eat the food that they purchased for the family, my brother, one of his sons, and they wouldn't buy me clothes. They wouldn't do anything for me. And so I lied and said I was 16 and got my first job as a waitress. And I started to earn money. I bought myself a little car for $150, and thus began my years of homelessness, couch surfing. I'd stay in campsites. Sometimes I sleep in my car. And sometimes people said, oh, that's just terrible. But it was kind of an adventure for me. I was young and I was free, had a car, and I was free from, authority figures. So it wasn't a bad thing. It was actually kind of an adventure. But at the same time, I was terrified, absolutely terrified. How am I going to survive? And always everything I did, everything I did was depression, a deep sadness, a hopelessness, a despair that how am I going to survive this? And is anything ever going to get better? And that probably was what led me next to trying to find someone to save me, as someone as in a human being, which is, we learn, is impossible. But I didn't know that at the time. And there began a series of miscreant choices and decisions and really messed up relationships with men.
Wow. I can imagine when you're 16, you're not physically or mentally prepared to take this on, and you're looking for an anchor of some sort.
Yeah, anchor is a good word for it. I had pretty much always taken care of myself and my brother. We took care of each other. So it wasn't like I was entirely ill-equipped to take care of myself. My mom, because of her own emotional problems, she didn't take care of us from a very young age. So I knew how to cook, do laundry, manage finances to a certain extent. So I wasn't completely lost.
Wow. Now, one of the things you write about during that period of time and past that period of time was you put on an appearance of being happy. But then you said it wasn't happy. It was a facade. Tell us how you dealt with that.
Yeah, it was kind of, that was pretty true of me most of my life. I think it was, when I really think about it, when I was thinking about it for this interview, it was like a survival mechanism. I had to be employable. I really never had friends to speak of until I was like 8 years ago, when I really learned to have friendships and learned how to connect with people. But I had to survive. So I came off to some people. It still surprises me. When I was in my 20s, I had a really big deal job, big deal position for an advertising agency. And some of the people who worked for me found me on Facebook recently, and they talked about how funny I was and how intelligent I was and what a good boss I was. And I was like, really? I was so stunned to hear those things because I was miserable. I was always miserable, but I developed professional skills and superficial social skills that allowed me to function. But I never gave up the idea that life was hopeless and I didn't know what I was going to do about it.
Now, you tried therapy.
Tried it, to say the
basically
least.
lived therapy. And you said by in your late 40s, the pain of depression and all the meds had made me feel not only emotional, but physically debilitated.
So I mentioned this right at the beginning of the interview. The drugs, I'd been taking psych drugs since I was 17. When I was 17, and the first therapist I saw said, "You're clinically depressed. There's nothing you can do about it. You're genetically predisposed after, taking some family history, and you will be dependent on drugs and talk therapy the rest of your life. And if you don't do that, you will kill yourself." So she was so I'm like, oh my God. So although there were periods where I wouldn't take the meds because I didn't like how they made me feel, which is mostly numb. A lot of people in those days who remember me from then described me as a walking zombie, and they didn't help. All they did was numb me. And so I'd take them, and by the time I was in my maybe late 40s and definitely early 50s, I think that the drugs were toxic. So besides how that affected my brain and like an excessive release of serotonin in your brain, that's what they do. My brain was depleted, and therefore my body began to be depleted. I felt physical pain, which people who haven't been severely depressed have no idea. It literally felt like my insides were pressing out towards my skin, almost like I was going to explode from the inside out. And it was painful. I had, joint aches, back aches, headaches. And so it was a combination of the drugs and just living in constant stress, chaos, and hopelessness. It's going to physically deplete you.
Absolutely. Now, the doctors said to you, as you just mentioned, you're going to be dependent on drugs the rest of your life. This is it. That's all it's going to be. Yet, you decided, I'm going to try something different. What led you to that?
Well, the shocking part of my story for a lot of people who hear it is that I had no longer any will to live. I think I even said this in my book. How long can someone go with this kind of pain before it's easier to die? And I was spending weeks in bed. I went days, sometimes even more, without brushing my teeth or taking a shower. I was in utter despair all the time. And I didn't want to live that way anymore. And I hadn't been able to find any solutions. So I prepared to end my life. I had all the elements ready to do it. And I began writing letters to my children. Nobody was home, and nobody was going to be home for a long time. And as I was writing the letters to my children, I considered that I done a lot of research about suicide because I wanted to like have all my, I'm a researcher. I wanted to know precisely what I was doing and getting into. And one of the things I read repeatedly is that a parent who ends their life by suicide's child is 4 to 60% more likely to see suicide as a way out of their own problems. And that kept stopping me, but not entirely, because I couldn't take it anymore. And then one of the things I really want to say is people say that when someone dies by suicide, it's a selfish, terrible act. It's selfish. And in a way it is, but what people don't understand is when your brain gets to that point, you're not thinking rationally. Two, they don't understand the level of the pain that you're in. And so it gave me pause for a minute as I'm writing letters to my children. And then I don't know if this was a spiritual experience or what it was, but a thought came to me that had never occurred before. And that was, what if there's something you don't know about yet? I tried everything short of ECT. I never did ECT, but I did everything else. And what if there's another way? And so I ran upstairs to where my then desktop computer was, and I started Googling things like alternative ways to heal depression, things like that. And you would think I would have done that already, but my brain was so fried that it never even occurred to me until I was at my most desperate moment, I guess. And when that occurred, all kinds of things popped up that were unbelievable and ultimately life-changing.
And some of that was rewiring your brain. Tell us very little bit about that. We don't want to give away the whole book there, but
yeah, as you know, I'm very passionate about this. This was one of the 3 elements most critical to healing my depression. I don't think we said yet, but having never lived without depression for 50 some years, I haven't had anything close to an episode in 8 years. Nothing, not anything close. So I discovered that any human being has a capacity to rewire their brain. There's a way to do it. I learned what the way to do it is. I developed methods for how to do it. And of course, it wasn't that alone. I had to change some of my underlying beliefs and recognize that I'm not my thoughts. We're not our thoughts. And just because you have a thought doesn't mean it's true. Like, I used to think you're just worthless. You're a terrible person. Well, it's not true. But we believe thoughts sometimes. So how to unthink those thoughts.
That's incredible. That's an amazing story. Now, here's a big question, Debra. Most people are too embarrassed to put their story out there. They'll suffer in silence. They'll put on a good facade, as you said earlier.
They're embarrassed.
Why did you choose to lay your entire story out there for the world? Initially,
I started writing the book in 2014, and my intention was hopefully to have my children understand why they had such a messed up mother. That was my original intention. Then as I began to write it and share it with certain people, they would say, this story could help so many people. At first, I was hesitant to lay all the dirt out about myself, but as I'd been in the process of understanding myself through the new guise of understanding my brain and how it got wired for depression, and began to have compassion for myself and understood why I did the things I did, I didn't feel shame about it anymore. And I knew that I needed to tell the truth, and be authentic and tell the dirt, because for me to say simply, oh, I was stressed, had a hard time, but then I got undepressed, it's meaningless to people. People have to be able to relate, resonate, and also truly to give people hope that if somebody who is as much a mess as I was, can live a joyful, peaceful, this makes me want to tear up every time. Somebody as messed up as I was, and I tell the truth, but here I am now. I have to share it. And as I've told you, Frank, and I say it in my book, literally, no matter what is going on in my life, and bad things still happen. That's part of life. I wake up filled with joy. Just, oh my God, I can't believe I get another day without depression and suffering. And without that, you can function. I mean, like, you can make right decisions. You don't have to mess up your life even more.
That's right. That's right. This story, folks listening and watching, as I said in the beginning, I read the manuscript before the book was completely done, and it's amazing the what the strength of the human character. Just do not ever give up on what an individual can accomplish. Because as I was reading this book, I was expecting to see, and then she died, and it was incredible. So the book is out. It's there's a
Okay,
pre-order
Frank.
special, December the 8th. Go ahead.
I just want to interject this real quick because I think it's important, is that most traditional therapists I've lost count of how many therapists and psychiatrists I had in my lifetime. They don't tell you can change your brain. I mean, I think there's a movement more now that they do, I guess, but why no one told me that? Because in 1946, Donald Hebb, who was a neuropsychologist, discovered that we could rewire our brains after 25, 28. And no one in the psychiatric and mental health community ever told me that. And I want people to know that it's possible and how to do it.
That's an enormous point. And I've interviewed a number of doctors, MD doctors, who have the courage to say, if the pharmaceutical companies aren't involved, doctors are instructed to follow a course of action, which is take this pill, and if that doesn't work, here's 3 more.
Yeah, and nothing against them. It's how they're trained, and
exactly.
they don't think beyond that because of their training.
That's absolutely true. As I mentioned, folks, this book has been released in pre-order, so it's a pre-order ebook. Yesterday, December the 8th, it became available, and it'll price the 99-cent special will stay in effect again today. Once the official ebook is ready, Amazon will download it for you. And there will be a printed version coming out next week. So those of you who prefer the printed version, there'll be one that will be coming out next week. So Debra, what last things do you want to leave with the people around the world here?
That, because I don't think I've made this clear, I have to say this, I'm not a physician, I'm not a therapist, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not an expert on drugs. But I do know this from my personal experience, that when you rewire your brain, effectively rewire your brain, it changes your neurochemistry. So I had depleted serotonin, which is why a lot of people take the psych drugs, because they think, well, it'll generate serotonin for me. But what they don't know or aren't told is that those drugs deplete your serotonin natural supply. But when you rewire your brain the way that I did, it changes your neurochemistry. I have plenty of serotonin now without drugs, and all the other feel-good neurochemicals like dopamine and all the things I mentioned in my book. And so, it's not just you change your brain, but it changes your neurochemistry. It changes you physically. And I guess one more thing I'd want to add is I had to work hard to change my underlying beliefs, not just about me, about who I am, but about the world, about the meaning and purpose of why I'm here.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And there's so much freedom in that, Frank. I mean, it blows me away to this day, the changes that I've been able to experience.
And I didn't know you prior to, but having read the manuscript, you can see it, ladies and gentlemen, you can see this metamorphosis occur in this book. And if you've ever been depressed, or you know someone who has been depressed, you have to get this book. It's that valuable. Well, Debra, we're just about out of time.
All right.
Thank you again for coming on.
Thank you, Frank.
Your book is Out of the Darkness, Aligning Science and Spirit to Overcome Depression. It's available now today, Click on the link, take advantage of that free order price. Okay. As I said, I had the opportunity to read this book. You have to get it. This is a must-read book. Now, you can see this show on Roku TV or on my YouTube channel, which is called Frank Zakari. And I will send links to Debra also, so she'll put it up in all the places that she posts to. So that this interview will be out there for the world. If you use my YouTube page, please subscribe. And let me leave you with this, as I do every week. None of us are in this alone. And the secret to walking on water is to know where the rocks are. And today, Debra showed us where many of those rocks are. Join us again next week when we look into another life-altering event. Debra, thank you again.
Thank you, Frank.